Hello, everybody. Welcome to another IAPC&M CPD and business building experience. And today I'm with the Eric Maisel, who I know is never happier than playing the role of grandfather and rolling around the floor with his grandchildren. But we know him as the American psychotherapist, coach, and author of more than 50 books. Now, I have to say, when Linda Monk, founder of the International Association for Journaling, who did a useful webinar for us last month, introduced me to Eric, she actually cost me a small fortune. So I ended up buying about half a dozen of Eric's books. I could not choose. All the titles look fabulous. Anyway, we're very pleased to have you, Eric. Thank you for your time. And you're going to be with us for two 1-hour sessions. So the first is today. And I'm going to hand over to you now, not waste any more time because we've got a lot to learn from you. So over to you, Eric, please.
Thank you so much. Welcome everyone on the line. If some of you are on the phone, I'll make sure to speak whatever's on my slide so you'll know what's going on. Glad you're here with me today. It's of course funny staring into the computer, but we're getting used to that. I've been coaching creative and performing artists for 35 years now. I started out as a psychotherapist, California licensed psychotherapist, and then segued into coaching because I didn't believe in the mental disorder paradigm. After working with human beings for a little while, I didn't think they were mentally disordered. I thought they were having trouble living, problems in living. So I left the therapy early on, and I've been coaching folks for, as I say, 35 years now. Everything about the creative life interests me, which is why I do one book after another, because after I do a book about creativity and depression, then I realize I better do one about creativity and anxiety, and then one about creativity and addiction, etc., because these are all of our issues. So let me get started. What I'm going to do today and in the next session is go through 12 major challenges that creative folks face, and then try to supply you with some tactics to deal with each of those challenges. We'll see how much we get to today, and then we'll finish up in the next meeting. And we'll leave a little time at the end for questions. I have a lot of material, so we probably won't get to a lot of questions, but you can always drop me an email to ericmaisel@hotmail.com if you have a question. So let's get going. Let's see if I can make this work. Yep. The first slide just introduces my creativity coaching trainings, which commence 3 times a year. They're online trainings. If you're interested in training as a creativity coach, get in touch with me. This slide will come up at the end again. So here are the 12 major challenges. Of course, we're all postmodern enough to know that there aren't exactly 12 major challenges, that this is just a way of speaking. But I think these 12 challenges capture a lot about what's going on in a creative person's life. So challenge 1, handling the hardness of the work. And we're going to go over each one of these in detail. Challenge 2, wondering why to bother, the existential question of why to make another photograph or why to make another poem. Challenge 3, fearing judgment, criticism, and pushback. Challenge 4, weathering the realities of process. Challenge 5, dealing with procrastination, resistance, and blockage. Challenge 6, weathering the creative personality. Challenge 7, dealing with the marketplace. Challenge 8, juggling competing life purposes and the rest of life. Challenge 9, dealing with limited opportunities. Challenge 10, getting a cognitive grip, getting a grip on your mind. Challenge 11, accepting okay work, because most of the work we do is going to be okay and not brilliant. And chasing great work. And last but not least, repeating oneself versus pushing forward. And by that I mean, maybe we've learned how to do something, write a certain kind of romance or create a certain kind of stripe painting. Well, then there become reasons for repeating ourselves, but also reasons for pushing forward. So let's look at these in detail. First challenge, handling the hardness of the work. Well, it's just flat out hard to write a novel or compose a symphony or make a full-length film. It is the kind of work that, since it's on our own shoulders to do, typically we haven't been paid beforehand to do it. So we're not on deadline. We're just doing it because we want to do it or think we ought to do it. Since we're doing it in those kinds of circumstances, it's much easier to turn on the television or go to your social media or play a game, play some sort of video game, than work on your novel or compose your symphony, because it's just hard work. Number two, each creation, each thing we're working on presents its own particular problems. One novel may have plot problems that are difficult to reconcile. Another novel may have a very weak hero, and we know that, and we don't quite know how to make the hero stronger. Another novel may be set in a place that we can't visualize very well, so the setting isn't strong. Each creation presents us with its own problems, often intractable, often too difficult to handle, which is why we sometimes put work aside for a month or forever, because we've encountered a problem in the work that we can't answer at this moment. Number three, there are few, if any, legitimate shortcuts to take in doing creative work. If you're trying to write your memoir, you can't really leave the people in your life out. It would be lovely to do that, then they won't be annoyed at us, but it's not really a memoir if you leave all the people in your life out. So in the work we do, there are very few shortcuts to take. We kind of have to do it the long way. Number four is a very big one that most folks, coaches and creatives, don't really understand, and that it's hard to keep making one choice after another. And the creative process is one choice after another. Put the blue here, put the blue there, put the comma in, take the comma out. Send your character to Zanzibar, send your character to Paris. One decision, one choice after another. Choosing provokes anxiety. And this is one of the reasons why anxiety threads through the creative process, because it is so much choosing. And many of the choices are flat out difficult. Some are easy. Put the comma in, take the comma out. That ought to be a fairly easy choice. But what about a big choice like where to send your character next, or where to go with the plot? Whatever plot decision you make, that's where your novel is going. And it can be very anxiety-provoking to make that kind of choice, knowing that you're setting yourself down a path for the next months that might be the wrong path. Number five, and this is true about everything in life, when a thing matters, that produces more anxiety, and we've made more work for ourselves when a thing matters. Some things we can dash off because they don't matter. But when you have ambitions for your creation, when you actually want to do good work or excellent work, then you want to do all the work that's necessary. And so you've made work for yourself. And last but not least in this category, the work doesn't necessarily get any easier just because you're now experienced. You do Crime and Punishment, but then you're still liable to do a novel like The Raw Youth or Poor Folk, or a less than stellar novel, even if you're Dostoevsky. And then you do a great novel, and then you do a less great novel. That's kind of the story of every creative person, is that it doesn't get easier because each new work produces its own challenges. And the realities of process are that not everything is going to work out well. So these are different ways of saying the work is hard. Now, some tactics for dealing with challenge number one. There's a lot of surrendering in the creative process. If you're doing it right, there's a lot of surrendering. So the first surrendering is just surrendering to the reality that the work is hard. If you try to put a smiley face on things, if you keep saying, oh, I want to do only cheerful work, or I want to be cheerful as I work, or I want only to be smiling as I create, you're probably not being real enough with yourself. And if your clients are saying that to you, you need to find your language, your ways of saying, hey, this may be hard. Let's try to embrace that this may be hard. That's number two. Embracing this. Let's stop fighting with the idea, maybe the half unconscious idea that this ought to be easy, that somebody somewhere has it easy. That is what a lot of would-be creative folks believe, that somebody somewhere else is having it much easier than they do, which is typically not true. You look at the biographies of creative folks, anybody, the Beethovens or Mozarts or anybody, they're not typically having it that easy. So let us all embrace the reality that this work is hard. Number 3 is an interesting one, I think. Lots of our clients believe that they're not disciplined enough to do the work, and so they beat themselves up around the idea of discipline. But actually, they're not devoted enough. I don't usually use spiritual language, but in some ways, we need to think of this work as sacred work and be devoted to it. Pavarotti has a quote I like, which I use a lot, which is, people say, I'm disciplined, but it's not discipline, it's devotion, and there's a big difference. And I think you can hear some of the synonyms of devotion: passion, curiosity, interest. Those are the things we need to be bringing to the table to make the hard work easier. You can't really white knuckle a novel for 2 years just via discipline. There has to be some passion there, some interest, some curiosity, something more than just discipline. Number 4, an absolutely crucial, valuable tactic to do yourself, but also to teach clients, is to do this work every single day. Because, here's the headline, this is a big headline. When creative folks skip 2 or 3 days, they lose weeks, months, and years. Every creative person knows that. They stop writing for 3 days, they kind of intend to get back to it on the 4th day, and a year passes and they haven't been writing. We lose a lot of time the second we stop. That's why one of my next books is called The Power of Daily Practice. I just think there's something super simple on the one hand, but profound about getting to your work every day. I believe we'll talk about this again a little later, but I just want to underline this point. If you wanted to sell your clients on one practical thing, have them get to their work every day. By the way, it doesn't matter if it's 3 minutes or 7 minutes or 14 minutes. The act of getting there for even a few minutes keeps the work close and prevents them from losing those months and years. And you want to celebrate with them that they've been to the work for 7 minutes or 9. When I work with a new client and I ask a new client who's been stuck for a long time, how much time do you want to spend on your work every day? Almost always they'll say, and I don't know why this is exactly, I have some intuitions, almost always they'll say 20 minutes. And that's because they don't want to set the bar too high and set themselves up for failure. I think that's why they pick 20 minutes, and I embrace that with them. I celebrate that. I say, if you're there 20 minutes, wonderful. In a month, we'll look at making it 40 minutes or an hour, but for now, that's superb to get there for 20 minutes. Number 5, try not to countenance the language that makes it even harder. That is, we'll talk at some point about getting a grip on your mind, but let's introduce it here. The idea that if you are thinking things like, wow, this is really hard, or I think this is beyond me, or I don't think I have a chance, or I'm not sure I'm really talented, or there's so much competition, we could make a super long list of the kinds of inner language that doesn't serve you. So helping, whether you usually work in a cognitive way with clients or not, I think that you do want to help all clients understand this simple idea, and it's a simple idea, that they want to be thinking thoughts that serve them. This is different from true and false thoughts, and if we have enough time, we'll get into this more deeply. But just try to remember this phrase, thinking thoughts that serve. You want your clients to be doing that. And then last, as a tactic, I have my ways of talking about this, and I think it's valuable if you find your ways of talking about balancing obsession, which is a good thing when it's good. I've done a whole book on productive obsessions because the word obsession got hijacked by therapy in the 1880s as obsession became defined as an unwanted, intrusive thought. Well, if you define it as unwanted, intrusive, you've made it negative by definition. But creative folks have known for 1 million years that there are productive obsessions, that you really want to bite into something and work on it. So on the one hand, that's wonderful, but you also have to know how to shut that obsession off and return to the rest of life. And that's what I mean by working in a way that's both obsessive and measured. Obsessive and calm simultaneously. If you can get to the place of being obsessed with your work and also calm, you will get a lot of work done. Okay, I can see that getting to 12 of these is going to be impossible. We'll just see, we'll just go where we can go. And by the way, if anybody wants this slide deck, I'm sure we'll figure out a way of getting people the slide deck. Challenge 2, the huge existential question which bothers us all sometimes and bothers some of us all the time, wondering why to bother with our work, wondering why to bother writing this novel or taking these photographs, going out and taking photographs of some more flowers or some more sunsets, or writing another poem. Why to bother? And this is expressed in these different ways. This challenge is expressed in these different ways. How valuable is a short story, a poem, or a photograph, let's say compared to a vaccine, for instance? Why spend so much time on something that, and this is the reality of process, may be only okay, only mediocre? If there were a guarantee that every time you touch something it would be brilliant, well, then you'd have more reason to bother, but there ain't no such guarantee. And there can't be. There's no way to get that guarantee. Number 3, the competition question. Since creating is a life purpose of so many millions of smart, creative people, that means there are so many people trying to do it. So why bother when there are so many of these millions of smart, creative, intense, active people doing it already? We have our answers for that. There are ways to speak to clients about the why bother, but just be aware that they're wondering this. They're wondering why to bother. 4 is a characteristic inner questioning. Why do something so essentially narcissistic, egotistical, and self-centered? Well, obviously we have to get a client to change that language and to understand that they have something unique to say, and whether they have something unique to say or not. I want to stop here and say a little bit that's a little long-winded, but I want to put this in some perspective. If you help a client understand that their creating is just one of their life purposes and not their only life purpose, that helps them have a life purpose that's maybe a little more narcissistic than it might otherwise be, because they may have other life purposes around service and family and relationships where they aren't narcissistic and egotistical. That is, if you move from the idea that there is one purpose in life to the idea of multiple life purposes and the necessity of life purpose choosing, then there's a better way to fit creating into a creative person's life picture by virtue of understanding that there are multiple life purposes in that person's life. Number 5, lots of creative people are also looking at the products of other creators, and noticing that their work is superb. Some work is superb. Maybe they're listening to a little too much Mozart and their own symphonies aren't quite matching up. So and this makes perfect sense that one is wondering this sort of question. If some people are doing great work and I'm not, why should I bother? And we have to help them find their answers to that. And we can name some of those answers quickly. Your work may get great. We have zillions of examples of creative folks who only started doing great work in their 50s. Their 20s, 30s, and 40s were their experimental times and preparatory work, etc. In other words, we have lots of answers to this, but we do want to respect that they are thinking this, that many creative people are wondering, why should I bother when there's so much good work out there already? And then last but not least, the super existential question, which all modern people and postmodern people are dealing with at some level: why bother about anything? And for me, my basic answer to this is helping people make the shift from seeking meaning, which is the 1,000-year-old metaphor, be a seeker of meaning, to the idea of making meaning. That while we're here, we have the responsibility and self-obligation to make meaning in this lifetime, in this world. So the why bother about anything is a self-obligation about being here, being real, being adamant, wearing the mantle of meaning maker while we're alive. That's one kind of way of speaking to the why bother about anything. And here are some other tactics. One thing that really helps creative performing artists resume or continue are 1 and 2 together. The remembrance that creating that art has been personally valuable. It's very important. Why would anybody do this if this were not personally valuable? But it has been. And that creating is an expression of love and devotion. I will often say to a client, just picture yourself at 5 or 6, sitting in a corner of the room, reading a book or drawing, or listening to music, or watching. Our grandkids are continually watching Aladdin and what's the other one, Tangled right now. And they're mesmerized, and they're already storytellers. Well, this is one of the main reasons we do it, is that we fell in love at 5 or 6 or 7 or 8. So as a part answer to the why bother, as a part answer, it's that we fell in love and that we're still in love. Number 3, I just spoke to this, that if we were to make a menu or list of our life purposes, creating is going to be on it. It's not going to be the only thing on that list. There's going to be activism and service and relationships and career and this, that, and the other thing. There will be many things on that list, but creating is going to be there. And for some of us, it's going to be high on our list of life purposes. So we do it because we have life purposes and because it is one of our life purposes. Number 4 is a mouthful. So let me try to say this mouthful. There is no meaning out there. Meaning is a certain kind of psychological experience, like love or hatred or anything else that is a certain kind of inner experience, which means many things. It means that meaning will come and go, just like any other experience will come and go. Joy will come and go. Anger will come and go. Meaning necessarily comes and goes because it's merely an experience. Well, let's say we want more of that experience, and we do. Let's say, to use loose language, we want life to feel more meaningful. It only feels more meaningful when we create more experiences of meaning. And creating is one of the ways we coax meaning into existence. It's one of the ways we create the experience of meaning. This is a very, if your client is still looking for meaning, still needing to go to the top of some mountaintop or sit at the feet of some guru, just waiting for something, cycling through all the world's philosophies and religions, I think we have to help that person stay put and make meaning rather than continue to seek. And I want to say one other major thing about this point, and this is one of the absurdities of living, is that the activity of making meaning may not feel meaningful. That is, we may know that we're writing our novel so as to create the experience of meaning, but on any single day, we may only have a sloggy, mournful experience. That is, we had a bad day with the book. So we didn't actually coax meaning into existence on that day. So the following is a very important phrase to keep in mind. Activities in the service of meaning may not themselves feel meaningful. We do them because they are in the service of meaning, but on a given day, our painting may just be a hash. Nevertheless, we're serving our meaning needs, even though on that day, nothing felt particularly meaningful. Number 5, I've said already that we have these responsibilities and self-obligations while we're alive. And then last, pretty much everyone has had the experience of making something they liked. And maybe just a portion of a thing that they liked. Maybe they've never written a whole novel that they liked, but there was a chapter in that set-aside novel that they know was really good. And we can speak to that to clients, that we do have the opportunity to make true, beautiful, and good things. By the way, let me just explain that phrase, which will sound very familiar to you. It's a famous phrase from the 19th century, truth, beauty, and goodness. That was the aspirational goal of artists of the 19th century, to make true, beautiful, and good things. Then in the 20th century, we deconstructed all 3 of those words. Suddenly we didn't have any idea what true meant, what beautiful meant, or what good meant. We've had 100 years of deconstructing those words. But I think in our hearts, all of us want to come back around to use fancy language, reconstructive postmodernism, and make true, beautiful, and good things again, and help our clients make true, beautiful, and good things again. Okay. Challenge 3. You can imagine that I want to say about each of them, this is the big one. Each of these is the big one. And this is a big one. Challenge 3, fearing judgment, criticism, and pushback. I'm sure you all know, as coaches and human beings, what's the world's #1 phobia? Public speaking. Not fear of flying or snakes or bridges or rats or this or that, public speaking. We find it very difficult to put ourselves on display. Even if it's a 2-minute speech at our workplace. Given that that's the world's #1 phobia, and given how difficult it feels to put ourselves on display, no wonder creating is so difficult when we understand that when we put the work out there, we are on display. We are necessarily on display. I get so many clients who say, can I use a nom de plume, or can I hide behind a mask, or can I put my work out there and have nobody know who I am? No, no, because we have our marketing and promoting necessities. And so we actually have to stand behind and advocate for our work. So no, you can't put on a mask. You actually have to do the work and then stand up and stand behind it. And most human beings don't like that. So these 6 are just other ways of saying that same thing. Lots of would-be creative folks and lots of creative folks fear being judged and criticized. One of the reasons I did a whole book on the subject called Toxic Criticism. That's how criticism is experienced often as really toxic and difficult. Lots of anxiety over possible pushback. This is especially true for memoirists, right? They're going to get pushback from the family and maybe threats. Maybe the ex is threatening to sue if you dare to write about him. These are real things. These are not joke things. Why would you write your memoir if you just got 3 emails from your ex saying, I'm going to sue you? Very difficult to not feel anxious about possible pushback. Our self-image and self-esteem may already be not so wonderful, and now we're daring to tarnish it some more by putting work out there. We may be embarrassed about what we reveal, and everything we do reveals something about us. It's not just darkness that we may be revealing. Maybe we're revealing that we're a little less smart than we think we are. And somebody's going to write a beautiful criticism of us saying, boy, she got that wrong in about 9 different ways. Lots of imposter syndrome feeling among artists that they're not really equal to the task. And they may not be equal to the task in the sense that, let's say you've been doing abstract expressionism for the last 20 years and now you want to do realistic painting. You may not be able to do it right off the bat. Your drawing skills may not be in a place where you can do that. I don't have this minute to spare, and I'm going to spare it anyway because I want to tell this story. When Van Gogh is fired from being a pastor. You may remember that he starts out as a religious zealot, and he's fired for being too much of a zealot. And he's at an existential extremity and believes he ought to kill himself, but then remembers that he likes painting. Rather than just start painting, he does an amazing thing, which almost nobody else in the history of anything does. Rather than just start painting, he decides that he doesn't have the equipment, he doesn't have the strokes to make the paintings he can see in his mind's eye. So he just spends months and months drawing strokes so that he could capture a cypress in 4 strokes or a dandelion in 2 strokes. Or he just does the preliminary work that's needed so that he can make the paintings he already knows in his mind's eye he wants to make. That's a long-winded way of saying we may not have the skills we need to do the work we want to do. And so we may be, in that sense, not an imposter, but not actually able to do the work we need to do, which means what? We have to do that preliminary work. We have to be honest and adamant and do whatever's necessary so that we aren't that imposter. And then last, there are lots of households. I've done whole books on authoritarian wounding in the family. Pundits claim 25% of the human race are authoritarian. We could spend hours and hours just chatting about authoritarians in the family. Well, if you grew up in that family, you do not have a lot of entitlement, and you're not going to be really ready for success. And so you may actually fear success. Success may be something in your mind that, were you to get it, would be just like one of those things you did in childhood that got you a good beating. And so you may well have to help clients gingerly get over this fear of success and find the way to have permission to do this work and be successful at it. Okay, so some tactics around this challenge. In my forthcoming book, The Power of Daily Practice, I identify, I think, 15 or 20 daily practices that folks might want to begin, and one is a warrior practice. Because I think that the activity of creating is actually a heroic activity for lots of reasons, because of pushback from the world, because there's an element of leadership and activism involved in creating, et cetera, et cetera. And so in order to do this work, I think we need to adopt something like a warrior persona in order to feel equal to both doing the work and putting the work out there. Number 2, I think I'm big on visualizations, and I think one of the visualizations that can help is with respect to perspective criticism. Just visualize yourself with a thicker skin. If that doesn't work for you because you don't want to see yourself with wrinkled skin and that it doesn't seem that attractive to you, figure out some other visualization that makes you impervious to criticism. By the way, just in my personal life, I've done 50 books. And in controversial areas like mental disorder world, I'm an advocate for what's called critical psychology and/or critical psychiatry and/or anti-psychiatry. So I write in controversial areas. I have yet in 40 years of doing this to reply to a criticism. I do not reply. I'm not going down the rabbit hole with somebody who has so much time to engage me in something or other. Because there are a lot of people out there with a ton of time to engage you in nonsense. So if you feel you need to reply to criticism or deal with criticism, so be it. But my suggestion is don't bother. And the don't bother is, let me just hop down to number 5. Everybody has an opinion. There is not a right opinion. If you look on Amazon, any given book, you'll see, 100 5-star reviews, 100 1-star reviews, 100 3-star reviews, or whatever. You'll see a range of opinions. Those things which are now considered masterpieces were considered terrible when they appeared. The Tchaikovsky violin concerto was booed off the stage. And it is now the concerto you must know how to play if you are a violinist, right? So try to take this in at some deep level that everybody has an opinion and you ought to go with your opinion first. Try to stand behind your own opinion first. Yes, somebody out there may have something useful to say. Maybe some editor says something really useful with respect to the novel you've shown her. Sure, listen to that. But basically and essentially and crucially, stand behind your own understanding of the worth of the work. Let me skip on. I'm going to start skipping some of these just for the sake of time. Number 4, weathering the realities of process. And this is one of those challenges that's going to go in one ear and out the other. Oh, sure, process. I know all about process. Most folks know nothing about process. They really don't understand how process works. So let me run through some of the pieces of the puzzle of process. Number 1, not everything we try works. We've got to embrace this in a deep, deep place. How many of our Nobel Prize winning poet, musician Bob Dylan songs are brilliant? Of his thousands, 24, 36, 48, whatever the number is, it's a percentage of the whole. For every creative person, pundits will say that Beethoven's first, third, fifth, seventh, and ninth symphonies are better than his second, fourth, sixth, and eighth. But you can't do 9 without 8. You can't do 8 without 7. You can't do 7 without, you can't skip the things that don't work. You have to do them and see they don't work. You have to spend that year doing symphony number 2 or whatever and live with the results. That's the reality of process. You can't skip the things that don't work. You have to just do them. 2 is the same as 1 or connected to 1. Number 3, you start on something and it wants to change. That's the reality of process. Maybe you started, I was thinking of one novel that starts out with the author seeing the image of a woman in a white dress crossing a casino floor, Las Vegas casino floor. And all she wanted to do was follow that woman. I'll play it as it lays. That's the novel I have in mind. So she followed the woman and the novel flowed that way. But what if at some point in that novel, suddenly another character comes in and that character wants to take over the novel? This happens all the time in real life as you're writing or painting or this or that. You start somewhere and then as you work, something else wants to happen. There is always this tension between pulling the thing back to its originating impulse or letting it go where it wants to go. This is kind of high-level stuff I'm talking about, but yet every creative person faces this all day long, that the thing in front of her wants to shift. And number 4 is a different kind of problem, and that is the thing that some piece of the thing that you're working on may not be available to you. You may not have an answer. Give you a quick example. I'm not remembering names very well right this second, but the fellow who wrote the novel, The Middle Passage or The Middle Way, about slavery and slave ships crossing the ocean, he could not figure out how to have God appear on the slave ship. There was a moment in the novel where he had to have God appear, and he didn't want it to be tacky or cheesy. He wanted to be God appearing in just the right way. And he could not proceed with that novel until it came to him. And it took him some weeks before the way God ought to appear came to him. Well, what do you do during those weeks of waiting for God to appear? Those are not pleasant weeks. All of us have to figure out what to do during those weeks while we're waiting for something. My typical answer to clients is to have them have a second project to work on, because not working is typically not a very good idea. And this is probably too much to say quickly, but let me just give you the headline again, and that is, while you're working on something, some piece of it may not be available, and that's its own problem. Number 5, we've talked about constant choosing. And number 6 is, again, something that you know but don't know well enough. And that is that you must embrace the idea that you don't know what's coming. that there's some genuine not knowing involved in the creative process. If you know everything already, it's kind of static and formulaic and what have you. That's why we tend to repeat ourselves, so that we know what's coming. But knowing what's coming is kind of the death knell to genuine creativity. So some tactics. I've already said some of these, and some of these are repeat. A deep acceptance of the realities of process. And for me, so many of the things that happen in my creative life, when they happen, my one-word mantra is process. If I've just made a hash of 32,000 words, I'm not going to beat myself up. Seriously, you may think that no human being doesn't beat himself up when they've made a hash of 32,000 words. I don't, because I know that making those hashes is an integral part of the process. Number two, we've said this in different ways, deep acceptance of making messes and mistakes. You add one color too much to the painting and you make mud, so be it. Got to be okay with that. Just got to be okay. Number three, and let me just add to number three, I think a great phrase to sell your clients on is to show up and not attach to outcomes. I think a mountain of good stuff is captured in that phrase. Show up and not attach to outcomes. Well, and then number four is saying that exact same thing. This is not a Buddhistic philosophy of detachment. I believe in attachment also. I think we want ambitions for our work. We want goals. We have our dreams. We have our passions. That's all attachment. And that's all painful, right? That's why Buddhists speak to not attaching, because attachment is painful. Having those dreams for our work is painful if we don't realize those dreams. But nevertheless, I think without that passion and attachment, we don't have enough motivational juice to do the work. So I think we want the attachment, but then we also need to know how to detach almost simultaneously. This is very hard to speak about in words. That's why I'm calling it a dance. And my hands are doing this because I'm trying to visualize something for you about attaching and detaching simultaneously. If you master this dance, you can work 4 hours every day, year in and year out, without beating yourself up when things don't work, and while creating a genuinely amazing body of work. Number five, if we had all the time in the world, we could go through maybe 20 anxiety management skills or tactics. I would recommend my book to you on this subject called Mastering Creative Anxiety. It's got lots of good things in it with respect to mastering creative anxiety. And then again, a tactic with respect to accepting the realities of process, thought management in the sense of thinking thoughts that remind you that this is the process, that nothing weird or unusual has happened, that you have not done anything wrong. There's nothing to be ashamed about. This is just process. Number five, dealing with procrastination, resistance, and blockage. Well, number one, these are anxiety states. These are all anxiety states: resistance, blockage, and procrastination. The number one thing we do when we anticipate anxiety is to flee the encounter. We don't go there. And that's what procrastination, resistance, and blockage are: flights away from the encounter. Which means that you need to help your clients have ways of cracking through that. I think it's just the thin veneer of anxiety. It's not massive anxiety. It's just enough to keep them from getting there on that day. So the procrastination, resistance, and blockage occurs because of anxiety, because the work is hard and it's way easier to turn on the TV. Oh, that should be loss of purpose, passion, curiosity, and interest. Imagine the following. Let's say you're on the 4th revision of your novel. Are you still curious about any of the characters in your book? No, not really. You kind of don't give a darn, but you're sitting there having to do the 4th revision because you know it needs it. It's very hard to make yourself go to the computer on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday of that week to work on the 4th revision when you have no passion for it. So remember your mantra around this, and that is, this is one of my life purposes. To get this book done is one of my life purposes, and this is one of the ways I coax meaning into existence, is by sitting here with this darn 4th draft and making it into the thing I need it to be. All said in a less long-winded way than that. Number 4 is really interesting, and let me spend a minute on this. One of the reasons we procrastinate and have trouble getting to the work is that we have to somehow get from our ordinary mind, the mind that we all have all day long, to your creative mind. So what's the major difference between these two minds? Your ordinary mind is completely trained to get things right. That's its job. Show up at 3 o'clock and pick up the kids, mow the lawn, pay the bills, get things right. And that's completely appropriate. Your ordinary mind is completely appropriate for the ordinary tasks of living. But then somehow you're supposed to move from that to this other mind where you have real permission to make mistakes and messes. That is not easy to do, to get from the one place to the other place, because all day long you're trying to do things right. Now suddenly you're saying to yourself, I don't need to do these things right. I just need to show up. It's hard to make that movement, which is why I think, and here I'll use my hand again, which is why I think you need a ceremonial bridge from your ordinary mind to your creative mind. And the ceremonial bridge that I sell clients on is in a book of mine called 10 Zen Seconds. The 10 of that title is one long breath, 5 seconds on the inhale, 5 seconds on the exhale. And the idea, it's a very simple idea of dropping a useful thought into a deep breath, marrying the cognitive benefits of a useful thought with the physiological benefits of deep breathing. And so how this works is you come up with a thought that's useful. In this case, for this particular task of moving from ordinary mind to creative mind, the phrase I like is, I'm completely, on the inhale, I'm completely stopping. And in performance mode, I can't say this quite calmly enough, but you would say this calmly. I'm completely stopping. And what that stopping means is not just racing through life, but I'm completely stopping my need to get things right. And so what you would do is, on your appointed time, let's say your beeper goes off, or you've sent yourself a warning email that it's time to create or something, but you still don't want to do it, you're still resistant. Well, then you would do this deep breathing and right thinking. You would take a few deep breaths and say, I'm completely stopping. I'm completely stopping. And hopefully that will edge your way into the ability to vanish into the work. Number 5, we've talked about this already, power of daily practice. There's nothing quite like having a solid ingrained practice. It takes care of a lot of the other problems we're talking about. If you kind of know that you're showing up to your writing every single day, 7 days a week. By the way, I sell clients on 7 days a week of creating, because the way I say it to them is, do we not have meaning needs on the weekend? What kind of crazy idea is that, that somehow on the weekend we have no meaning needs? We're just supposed to what? Relax and do the laundry and take a stroll? No. Anyone who has recently reread Camus' The Stranger, if you remember Meursault's Sunday, how horrible his Sundays are when he is free to do nothing. Practically goes crazy on those Sundays because he's free to do nothing. So our meaning needs do not end on the weekend. And so for me, our creativity practice ought to be a 7-day-a-week affair. And then I'm going to skip 6. That would be another hour to talk about how meaning leaks out of the enterprise, but let me not go there. So some tactics: daily practice, ceremonial bridge that I just talked about. I think I like ceremonies. I think they are not to be sneered at. And I think creating a starting ceremony so that you know that lighting the candle means that you're starting work on your novel today, or putting on a certain kind of music means that you're now getting to work. That activity is sort of like one of those ceremonial bridges that's allowing your brain to move from that ordinary brain of everything right to that other brain of permission to be imaginative and dreamy and what have you. So, by the way, as a coach, you don't have to dream up these ceremonies. You just invite your client to do that work, right? You would say to a client, what kind of starting ceremony would you like to dream up this week? Let them do that work. Now, you may have some to offer. I offer my 10 Zen second ceremonial bridge idea because I think it's a good idea. So sometimes I offer, but most of the time I invite clients to go do that work. 4, we've talked about. 5, we've talked about. 6, I'm going to put my hands up here again. This is one of my little tactics, is to feel the balance between loving what I'm working on and hating what I'm working on. And if the hatred has just risen too high, I've got to love the work. There's nobody else to love the work but you. Only you can love your work. Nobody else can do it. So you want to raise the love side up when the hate side is rising up. Oh man, do I hate this painting. You've got to love it again. And actually, I don't do it empty-handed. I like little river stones. I like to feel the grip of little river stones this is one of my ceremonies. Okay, I think we can get to 6, whatever it is. Oh my word, we have only a small one here, your personality. Okay, let's handle everything about the creative personality in a minute or 2 or 3. So there is a creative personality, I think. In the creativity literature, about 75 traits of the creative personality have been identified. I list them all in one of my books. I think it's that little blue book called The Creativity Book. You don't need to know about 75 personality traits, although it's interesting. But here are some headline ones. I believe that some people are born with extra appetites. Who knows why? I wish we could stop for me to talk about my vision of personality as being made up of original personality, formed personality, and available personality. It's a really useful model, but we just don't have time to talk about it now. But what I'm talking about in this split second is my idea of original personality, namely, we come into the world with stuff already. Anybody who's had kids or kittens or dogs or any creature knows that every creature is individual already, right out of the womb. So I think we have extra appetites, which is wonderful when it comes to wanting to write a 2-hour screenplay, and it's not so wonderful when it comes to wanting peanuts or sex or heroin so we have to be mindful of our appetitive nature and recognize that we have these probably outsized appetites, which on the one hand may well serve us as a creative person when it comes to creating, but where we have to spend a lot of attention when those appetites are not serving us. For more about the thing I just said, I have a book out called Life Purpose Boot Camp, which was then followed by the Life Purpose Diet. You'll get the idea of what that title means, and that is dealing with appetite as if it were one of our life purposes, tackling our outsized appetite as one of our life purposes. Number 2 is so interesting. We could spend so much time on the idea of chi and the idea of energy. I also think that creative people come into the world with extra energy. So many of our poor kids who are getting this ADHD ridiculous diagnosis are kids with energy who are bouncing off walls because childhood is boring and school is boring and their lessons are boring and they're just bouncing one way and another. So we have to deal with this energy. How does this energy manifest? As unproductive obsessions, as manias, as compulsions, and as lots of energy for doing our work. You can tell that this would be a long conversation to talk about energy, but let me just give you the headline here, which is we come with extra energy. Creative people come with extra energy. Now, if you personally don't feel particularly energized, that may well be because you're sad. Because sadness will take care of a lot of that energy, will deplete us of energy. And lots of your creative clients may not say, wow, I've got so much energy. They may say exactly the opposite. I have no energy. So then you would be looking at, you can tell I'm not using the D word. I'm not using the depression word, because I don't use any clinical diagnoses words because I don't believe in them. I think they're labels. I think we're dealing with old-fashioned words like sadness or despair, disappointment, other words like that, and not some, okay, you can see I've got to stop here or go into that hour talk about depression. So we're not going there. Number 3, we have to deal with individuality. We're going to be butting our heads against culture and society forever, because we want to say what we want to say. We want to make our points. We have our positions. We have our beliefs about what's right and wrong. We have activist energy because we care. And so this part of our life is going to be always oppositional. Hopefully it's not with your mate. You don't want the oppositional energy to play out there. But again, this is a lot to speak about in a short time. But just as the headline, from birth, creative folks are going to want to retain their individuality, which is going to have them butting heads against parents and teachers and painting teachers and music teachers and curators and editors and everybody on the face of the earth, period. Relationships. So typically creative folks wouldn't mind spending a lot of time alone working. They are typically introverted. We could do all of the different initials on all the different personality scales to describe the creative personality. On the other hand, they do love community. They just don't trust it very much and can't find it very easily. To give you a quick 1-second anecdote, I'm not sure I can get, well, I guess I'm going to give this anecdote now that I've started it. What did Van Gogh, who really could not tolerate people, do the second he got to Provence? He bought 12 crazy, outsized, expensive chairs for the salon he was going to run, which of course he never ran because he didn't like people. But his first impulse was to try to create community, even though he didn't like people. So this is sort of a jokey way of saying creative folks are going to have to deal with this issue of solitude versus engagement forever. We're coming up on just a couple of minutes left. I think that maybe rather than trying to rush through the next slide, we have 6 more challenges to do the next time we meet in 2 weeks. I'm just going to scoot to the end and not try to finish everything up. We'll return to where we are. I'll remember where we are. Let me just scoot to the end because I don't want to not leave you with the opportunity to maybe join me in September when the creativity coaching trainings begin. These are 16-week online trainings. They're great. There's an introduction to creativity coaching training and an advanced creativity coaching training that go on simultaneously, and they can be taken at the same time. And a lot of people do that. So if you'd like to know more about this or anything I do, just drop me an email. My website is ericmaisel.com. Feel free to go there. I want to mention another thing or two that's coming up. One is if you are a coach and you are wanting to create a course or a class or a workshop, I have a very good mastering course creation workshop coming up at the beginning of August. It's a 2-month course in creating courses. If that prospectively interests you, drop me an email. And what else? I think that's probably enough selling for this moment, but do visit my site. And if the creativity coaching trainings interest you and you need more information, either visit my site or drop me an email at this email address. I think maybe that might do it for this hour.
Thank you. Wow. Gosh, do you know what? Picking up on a couple of your words, Eric, I think I'm going to be productively obsessive about learning from you. That was a wonderful hour. Thank you very much. I can see lots and lots of messages. But before everybody leaves, we always like to end with a little bit of CPD. But before we do that, any particular questions anybody has got that they just must ask Eric now while he's in the hot seat, then please put them through. I mean, there were so many things I would love to discuss with you, but you were very wise stopping at point 6, and we'll pick up at point 7 in part 2. And
Yes.
if we need a session 3, maybe I can twist Eric's arm to give us a 3rd session, which was obviously going to be the 2nd session. So trust me on that, everybody. I will do my best to get it for you. But
I'm happy to do that.
Yeah.
Dawn, I'm happy to do an all question session also, if that's of interest to anyone.
Right. Okay. I mean, there was so much good stuff. I love the, you know, don't bother biting the hook on the criticism, and having that deep acceptance for the mess and the mistakes we make, because it's from our failures and mistakes and messes that we learn and grow. So that was a lovely reminder. There's lots and lots of thank yous for the rich content. Deep acceptance of the process was extremely useful. Yes, it was, Ruby. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Dean. We like to start on time and we like to finish on time. So right now, if everybody would just like to take a deep breath and take 60 seconds to jot down your CPD learning, because we know, in the chat box, by the way, if you want to share, if not on your pad and pen, because we know 10 minutes from now, you're going to have forgotten something like 10% of what you've said you were going to do. And certainly in 10 days time, you're going to have forgotten 90% of what we've covered. So just now for 60 seconds, just breathe and just reflect on your notes and drop in the chat box what you most got out of this. And I will share this chat box with Eric and any questions he can address in our next session. So I will keep quiet for 60 seconds. Wonderful. Thank you very much, everybody, for sharing and participating with passion and energy. And especially to you, Eric. Very generous spirit, lovely webinar, lovely way of delivering it to you. We've had messages and probably too many to go through now because our hour is up. But as I say, I am going to share the chat box with you. And hopefully you will all be joining us on Wednesday, the 22nd at same time, 5 o'clock. So exactly 2 weeks today. Put that date in your diary. You will automatically get a Zoom invite for it because you've been on this call. Tell your friends, family, creatives, coaches, artists, everybody is welcome. And it's courtesy of the IAPC&M that we offer these CPD and business building webinars to everybody, because we believe everybody matters. So I'm your host, Dawn Campbell. Thank you for attending. Thank you, Eric. We'll leave you to go and enjoy a peaceful day now the grandchildren have left yesterday. You can just go, ah. And yeah, lots and lots to take away. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.